Good day everyone and pleased to meet you all. I am Patricia Jade Lim and my groupmates are Mark Hilmalyari and Michelle Anpangan. And we are here to discuss you about the conflict theories. So let's start. First, we define what is conflict theory. Conflict theory is a field of sociology that focuses on competition and the dynamics of conflicting interests between different social groups. Conflict theories of criminal justice look at criminal laws as a means by which more prosperous and powerful groups exercise control and containment over disadvantaged groups. So conflict theory is a criminological theory that attempts to explain criminal behavior and behaviors of key actors as to what is the reason the crime or delinquency happens in the community. Next is conflict theory emphasizes the role of coercion and conflict and power in society, and that social inequality will inevitably occur because of differing interests and values between groups. This theory identifies the state and the law as instruments of oppression used by the ruling class or more powerful group for their own benefit. And that conflict, inequalities and oppression will result to delinquency if not overcome, if not resolved. Next, William Chambliss. Who is William Chambliss? William Chambliss is an American criminologist and sociologist that was born on 1933. After Chambliss wrote his first book, The Crime and the Legal Process, which focuses on criminal transgressions between black and white people, he published a seminal text or book with Robert Seidman, Law, Order, and Power, that states the assumptions of the conflict perspective. First, law represents the values deemed most important by that segment of society with the power or influence to have their interests translated into law. So in here, it seems like the one being translated to law are those important and beneficial only to more powerful groups in the society. So the less powerful are being left behind, obviously. Next perspective, law reflects those values that are considered essential, maintaining social order and the control of potentially threatening groups. So it is important to maintain the social order to resolve any disputes and not go further into larger problems. Next, law represents the protection of values that are in the interest of particular groups. The legal system reflects the interests of the state. The law may represent the larger goals of mediation between conflicting groups, but the law also functions to maintain distance between groups and the power of some groups over others. In short, the law means protection for that interest of the powerful group. The interests of the rich and powerful are actually translated into law and administration. And those law controls the less powerful groups, but not the more the less powerful groups, but not the more powerful groups. Just like the saying of the law and justice are only for those who's rich. Next, we go to conflict theorists. First conflict theorist is Torsten Selin. He was born on October 26, 1896. He is a Swedish-American sociologist at the University of Pennsylvania and a penologist. He wrote an article namely Culture, Conflict, and Crime that clarified the culture conflict theory. He also discusses about the distinction between crime norms and conduct norms or group norms, and and the effect of heterogeneous and homogeneous areas in culture conflict theory. So we define cultural conflict theory. Cultural conflict theory is also known as cultural deviance theory. This theory suggests that crime is caused due to the clash of values that arises when different social groups have different culture ideas of what is acceptable behavior. Cultural conflict theory, in other words, different social groups have different cultural beliefs and ideas that conflict. And this conflict sometimes leads to crime or delinquency, because divergent cultures who come into direct contact within same society or between societies will result in conflict. So, what is crime norms? Crime norms are those found in the criminal law. Crime norms contained in the criminal law reflect rules or norms that prohibited specific conduct and provide punishments for violations. Conduct norms, on the other hand, are those norms specific to localized groups which may or may not be consistent with the crime norms. These conduct norms reflect the values, expectations, and actual behaviors of groups in everyday life. Conduct norms are defined by the groups to which the individual belongs. These conduct norms are basis for human behavior, as it is acquired early in the life through childhood socialization. So, it is the nature of the children. The crime occurs when individuals acting on the conduct norms of their own group are in violation of the conduct norms of the dominant group, and that conduct norms of the dominant group has enacted into law. And we go to the effect of heterogeneous areas. Celine, according to Celine, delinquency rates are higher in heterogeneous areas. And why is that? Because in heterogeneous areas, people have come from different places, have different culture, beliefs, religions, race, and etc. And when the society became more heterogeneous, the probability of growing and more frequent conflict, therefore deviance or delinquency, would increase because of the differences. And according to Celine also, delinquency rates are lower in homogeneous areas because they come from same culture and have same beliefs. That will not, of course, if you have same beliefs and culture, you will not come into conflict. Next theorist is George Wald. He was born on October 5, 1896. He was also a sociologist, a specialist in criminology, and a university professor. He published a book, namely Theoretical Criminology, and that where he discussed about the conflicting group theory. Conflicting group theory focuses on criminal behavior results from conflicts between interests of two divergent groups. Such conflict becomes translated into criminal laws, reflecting the desires of those groups with greater power to control or regulate weaker competing groups. According to Wald, humans are naturally social beings, forming groups out of shared interests and needs. These groups will over time come into conflict with one another over competing vested interests. Much like Celine, George Vold was interested in examining crime as it relates to conflict between groups. But, in contrast to Celine's explanation of crime as resulting from a conflict between the conduct norms of divergent cultural groups, Vold focuses and attempts to explain certain types of crime that occurs as a result of conflict between the interests of the divergent groups. Minority groups, the underprivileged and the young in general, are unable to influence legislation or the law, and as a result, many of their actions are seen as illegal. And criminals will be defined as those who pose a threat to more powerful groups in some way. And criminality here depends on which side ultimately wins the conflict between the more powerful groups and less powerful groups. Next theorist is Austin Turk. He was born on May 28, 1934. He was a criminologist, sociologist, and an educator who pioneered the theory of criminalization. He published a book, Criminality and Legal Order, and he discussed about the theory of criminalization. He also discussed the effect of organization and sophistication in crimes. Theory of criminalization. This describes the conditions and differences between authorities and subjects that result in conflict, and under this conflict the conditions of criminalization occur. According to Turk, authorities are the decision makers. These are the police, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, or etc. And the subjects are the individuals affected by those decisions, or the minority groups. Criminality is a definition applied by individuals with the power to do so, and that is the law enforcers. Conflict theory, according to Turk, increases in likelihood. 1. When subjects belong to an organized social group whose behaviors reflect great value differences between them and those in authority. 2. When subjects are relatively unsophisticated. The meaning of sophistication is having knowledge of behavior of others used in order to manipulate the opposition. In number 1, conflict will likely increase because they will be more likely resistant to authority. Organized social group are more likely resistant to authority. And number 2, when subjects are relatively unsophisticated, conflict will likely increase because if they know the behavior of the authority, subjects might remain firm and endure the authority, as they know how to assess the strengths and weaknesses, and this authority may use force to achieve their goals. So, the criminalization depends less on particular behaviors of people and more on their relationship with authority. So, the conflict theories related cases will be discussed by Mark Hilmalyari.
Conflict theories related cases. In Thorsten Celine, cultural conflict. Example case. Muhammad versus State number A11A2289. Abdi Akid Muhammad was convicted of possession of cathinone, a Scheduled 1 controlled substance in a violation of the Georgia Controlled Substance Act. On March 4, 2009, 2 packages were delivered to DHL, or Daisley, Hillbaum, and Lynn Express in shipping facility in Clayton County. The packages were initially shipped from Kenya to DHL facility and in the Netherlands, from where they were shipped to the United States on March 2. The DHL Express security manager suspected that the package might contain a narcotic, and supervisor opened them revealing some sort of dry sticks or twigs with leafy materials, wrapped in a banana leaves or some sort of leafy material. DHL alerted the Clayton County Narcotics Unit, and several officers responded to the facility. One of the officers examined the contents of the package and visualized and identified the material as cat. At trial, Muhammad testified that he was born in Somalia, where cat is legal and widely used, including at weddings and other parties. He further explained that the cat is harvested from plants. Fresh cat is green and it turns darker within 3 to 4 days after harvesting. Muhammad also testified that Somalians do not ingest cat until at least 2 days after harvest, so that the chemicals will go out and it won't be too strong. He further stated that it takes 3 to 5 days for cat to arrive from Africa to United States, and the strong chemicals are gone by the time it arrives in the United States. The state presented no evidence to contradict Muhammad's assertion and instead submitted testimony by an expert conceding that the cathinone degrades into catine. The case was reversed because Muhammad is not aware that the cat contained cathinone and doesn't have any knowledge that it was illegal in United States. Next was George Ford conflicting theory group. Example case Plessy versus Ferguson, number 210. In 1892, Homer Plessy, a mixed-race resident of New Orleans, deliberately violated Louisiana's Separate Car Act of 1890, which required equal but separate railroad accommodation for white and non-white passengers. Plessy was charged with boarding a whites-only car. Homer Plessy is a man of mixed race who was an octoroon, person of 7/8 white and 1/8 black ancestry. Plessy was born a free man and was a fair-skinned man of color. However, under Louisiana law, he was classified as black and thus required to sit in the colored car. On June 7, 1892, Plessy bought a first-class ticket at the Presley Street Depot and boarded whites-only car of the East Louisiana Railroad in New Orleans, Louisiana, bound for Covington, Louisiana. After Plessy took a seat in whites-only railway car, he asked to vacate it and sit instead in the black-only car. Plessy refuses and was arrested immediately by the detective. As planned, the train stopped and Plessy was taken off the train at Press and Royal Streets. Plessy was remanded for trial in New Orleans Parish. Judge John Howard Ferguson ruled against Plessy in the state criminal district court the law on the grounds that Louisiana had the right to regulate railroads within its border. Plessy appealed the U.S. Supreme Court, in which heard a case for 4 years later in 1896 and ruled 7-1 in favor of Louisiana, establishing the separate but equal doctrine as a legal basis for Jim Crow laws that the state and local laws that enforce racial segregation in the southern United States. Plessy was convicted for violating the Separate Car Act, which carried a $25 fine or 20 days in jail. In relation to George Ford conflicting group theory, in the case of Homer Plessy, there is a discrimination between white and black people. There is an equal freedom that was common in the United States. So in this case, Homer Plessy, which he belonged to the weaker group versus the powerful, from that we will see the difference. Louisiana government is a powerful group, created and enacted law to control the weaker group, in which to this case These are the people who has a different race and color. Since Homer Plessy was black, he cannot sat for whites only car. I will just cite an example for Austin Turk theory of criminalization because we were not able to find some related cases to this theory. For example, the anti-drug war in the Philippines under President Rodrigo Duterte that has led to the deaths of over 12,000 Filipinos to date, mostly urban poor. Our policemen are falsifying evidence to justify the unlawful killings. They always targeting poor people who use or sell illegal drugs, and then during bypass operation they always says that the person or users were resisted, which led to the extrajudicial killings of drug suspect. They do not catch after drug lords or who supply illegal drugs, which is the best possible way to prevent criminality against drugs.
Conclusion. Conflict theories are about inequalities that result to conflicts. Laws resolve conflicts. Laws make conflicts. So, in Thorsten Selin theory pointed the distinction between crime norms and conduct or the group norms. Crime norms is those found in the criminal law, while in the group norms, it is those norms specific to localized groups, which may or may not be consistent with the crime norms. In crime norms contained in the criminal law reflects rules or norms that prohibited specific conduct and provide punishment for the violations, while in the conduct group norms is very specific in the particular group that may be shared by many diverse groups and they may come into conflict with each other. So in George Vold conflicting group theory, in theoretical criminology approaching an understanding of the social nature of crime as a product of the conflict between groups within the same culture. Humans are naturally social beings forming groups out of shared interests and needs. The interests and needs of groups interact and produce competition in an increasingly political arena over maintaining and or expanding one group's position relative to others in the control of necessary resources. The challenge for all groups is to control the state for their own sectional interest. So example, the definition of theft might remain constant, but the allocation of resources to investigate and prosecute theft may be unequal distributed between blue-collar and white-collar version of the behavior. So further criminality is essentially a status that is conferred as or ascribed by a person in authority to individual to engage in a particular set of behaviors. Criminality is a definition applied by individual with the power to do so. So overall, these conflict theories only suggest that conflict and laws are interconnected. The laws can be used to resolve or solve the conflicts between different groups, but the laws sometimes are the one which brings conflict to everyone, especially if the one who's creating or implementing it is biased and favor to those more powerful group of people.